What are some cryptid/ghost/unexplained stories you'd be willing to share? One afternoon I was at work. I walked past a room with a window in the door and automatically glanced in the window. There was a woman standing in the room. Except there are only 3 people in the building and the other 2 were in the office behind me. I took a couple steps, realized what I had just seen, and backed up quickly, but by the time I got back to the window the room was empty. There was only one door and when I opened it the room was empty. At the same building, a co-worker was telling me that she was in the office right around the corner from that same room. She couldn't see the door but she could see the shadow of the door on the floor as it slowly opened and closed. She was the only one in the building at the time and she refused to check. I arrived about an hour later and she asked me to check the door and it was still locked. I worked there about 3 years and every single one of us had stories. We heard voices in empty rooms. Once we were sitting in the office and we heard somebody breathing in an empty corner. It was common to be in one of the rooms and think somebody had just walked into the room, only to look up and find that the room was empty except for you. I had one manager who scoffed at all of our stories. She did not believe us when we told her there was something fairly benign but creepy in the building. We were sitting in the office, she scoffed and loudly said, "If there's anything in here, prove it." We all held our breath, kind of nervous, a bit scared but also curious. And just about the time my manager was getting that look on her face that said, "Ha, told you so," something was thrown out in the hallway. It took us several minutes to work up the courage before going to check and finding that a book that normally sat on a bookshelf near the front door had somehow gone from that bookshelf around the corner and halfway down the hallway. The manager never talked about it and quit shortly after that. I've since quit also, but last I heard they were still hearing voices and seeing shadows in the building. When I was 7 years old, my grandma was in the hospital dying. At the time my family was strapped for cash and my mom was pregnant, so only my dad went to California, where she lived, to see her before she died. The day that she died, we got a phone call from her with her wanting to talk to each of us saying how much she loved us. A few hours later, we got a call from family members saying that she had passed away. When we told them that we had just received a call from her a few hours prior, everybody was in disbelief, saying that she had been laying unconscious in the hospital bed all day and she could have never called, yet alone been able to articulate her thoughts to us. To this day we have no idea how she called us and I don't think we ever will. I grew up in an old house and my family definitely experienced events that were hard to explain. Besides all the usual noises and occasionally hearing your name being spoken, here's the top 2 weirdest things. 1. My brother and I were teens, eating dinner in the kitchen. There was a glass of water on the counter. We heard a noise where the glass was and both looked toward it and we swore we saw it move an inch. As we were still looking and discussing it, the glass flew several feet across the counter and smashed onto the floor. 2. Once when I was in college and I was home for holidays, I was in the kitchen getting food prepared. I was home alone at that point and my brother was due home at any moment. I heard the front door open and close. I called out hello to my brother and heard nothing back. Then I saw a shadow pass by the kitchen into the hallway and I assumed my brother was being rude, so I followed and kept calling hello. I saw the shadow again turning another corner toward my brother's bedroom. I saw my brother's door closing. At this point I was calling out about what a jerk he was because we hadn't seen each other in months. I pushed the bedroom door open and uttered some insults, ha ha, and the room, as well as the whole house, was empty. That was super chilling. I really had seen someone moving through the house. Flash forward 15 years later and when my husband and I bought an oldish house, built in 1870, I was up in the 3rd floor arranging boxes and I heard a very clear and very polite woman's voice say, "Well, hello there. Never saw or heard anything in this house since." Smile. My dad told me this one day, when my dad was at home alone, he was going to eat one more thing before showering. He got some ulam, food in Filipino, because my dad is Filipino, and began eating. Then There was a blackout. So he got a candle and continued eating. He saw something white to his right. He looked to his right and saw nothing. He continued eating, but it was still there. He got a bit nervous and began eating faster. It was still there. He ate even faster. When my dad finished, he quickly put the bowl in the sink, and looked in the mirror. He then noticed there was a piece of rice stuck next to his eye. Couple years ago our TV started behaving really weirdly. It started with just pausing, fast-forwarding and rewinding what we were watching, flicking through channels or changing the volume by itself. Then it gradually stepped up to putting horror movies on and entering the pin normally required for films rated above PG by itself. We changed the pin and then we would see the pin being typed incorrectly 3 times. Then it started flashing random pictures on the screen. One it did a lot was cat's eyes, don't remember the rest. Have no idea how it got access to the pictures either. I doubt these random pictures would be stored anywhere in the TV. We called out the TV company multiple times and they thought we were crazy, until they came out and saw it for themselves. No one could figure out what it was. They kept recording what it was doing and sending it around and nobody knew what was causing it or how to fix it. In the end we had to get a new box. Not had anything like that happen since and still have no clue what caused it, but it was terrifying at the time. There was a really weird occurrence at my dad's house a few years ago. He awoke to the sound of dogs barking and realized the neighborhood dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own started to bark he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest except a church directly across the street that at the time was just a gravel lot. My dad was too far away to see anything, but in the dead of night, he could definitely hear the sound of someone running at full tilt across the gravel. A few things freaked him out from this. 1. Whatever it was definitely ran on 2 feet. Try having a dog run on gravel versus a human and you can tell the difference. And it was big. Both myself and he have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. 2. It was easily running somewhere around 40 to 50 miles per hour in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare the speed because the road itself is 45 miles per hour limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. 3. The final thing. Its huffing and gasping was so loud he could hear it from his front door and was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sound to other animals and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. The freakiest part was the almost synchronous reactions the dogs had. He's never heard dogs react like that before. Both him, my stepmom, my stepbrother, and several of our neighbors all can account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs, but it was only my dad who heard what they were after. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. We do like right on the border of the Cascade Mountain Range and are surrounded by park and federal land if you want to get an idea of where this took place. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he had returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking that he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point I get the feeling that something isn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point she had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder, but shakier voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond, repeated in my head. But the silence continued. Now at this point I'm freaking out and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and began opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown, creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mum, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home as well as she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time as we still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. This isn't a story involving me. It was actually when my mom was a little kid, so I've only heard this story from my grandma, who likes to tell me things like these when I visit her. My grandma was traveling with my mom and her 3 younger siblings. One of them was a baby and the others were toddlers or just young kids. Of course, handling 3 hyper kids and 1 baby on an airplane isn't that fun, and my grandma was beyond exhausted by the time they took their seats. My grandma chose a back row on the flight, sitting with the 2 youngest while my mom sat in the other row with her sister. Things quieted down for a bit when they took off, but as time went on my mom and her siblings grew more restless. Lots of whining, complaining, and crying that made my grandma wish she could just sleep and forget it all. Just as my grandma's about to lose it, a man sitting behind her taps her shoulder, and my grandma turns to look at him. He frowns, noticing how tired she is, and asks if she'd like help calming down her crazy kids. Of course, my grandma is so done that she quickly agrees. Side note, nowadays I don't think people would be so quick to hand over their babies, but this was back when strangers were a lot more chill with each other, so I guess that explains that. My grandma quietly reads, a wave of relief washing over her as the man hands my mom and her sisters coloring books and quiets down the baby by dangling an interesting toy over the seat. And for the rest of the plane ride, everything was quiet. My grandma says it was the most quiet she'd ever had since my mom was born. The plane lands. My grandma thanks the man and starts getting my mom and her siblings ready to get off the plane. Of course, she's really excited to introduce this man she befriended on the flight to my grandpa and tell him how he saved her from a hell of a flight. My grandma gets off the plane with everyone and meets up with my grandpa. She proceeds to excitedly tell him all the details, and that he should wait with them to meet the man. After all, the man was behind them and would be one of the last ones to get off the plane. They were both in back rows. 10 minutes went by. Then 15. They had been watching people get off the whole time, but the man never showed. My grandma was incredibly puzzled by this. How could he have possibly disappeared when they were sitting in front of him and had gotten off the plane before him? My grandma, worried that something happened to him, stopped one of the crew members who had a list of all the people on the flight. She asked for his name, which she had learned on the flight, only to be given this response. Sorry, Mom, there's no man's name on this list. To this day, no one knows quite for sure who this man really was or where he could have gone. My grandma and I think that he was some sort of guardian angel or spirit sent to help her in a time of need. Unexplained story here. So I was walking home from college one afternoon. It's about a 2-mile walk between home and college. I'm on the outskirts of the town center and entering a busy neighborhood, and everything seems normal until I start getting a creepy feeling, like I was being watched or something. So I look around, and what do I find? Literally every person looking at me and watching me as I go past them. Even the people driving were looking at me as they went past. Like, there was this one guy, who was turning the corner to come onto the road I was about to cross, and he was legit leaning over in his seat, staring at me as he drive around this corner. Happened for the entire way home, but hasn't happened since. Was super freaked out. Didn't tell my family or friends 'cause they would think I'm crazy. And y'all out there saying this world ain't a simulation. I got home from school one day and decided to play a game on my computer. During intermission in the game, I would talk in a group chat with a couple of my friends. We were telling jokes and making each other laugh until I needed to use the restroom. I told them I would be right back and left my phone on the desk and didn't turn it off. When I returned, I noticed that some of the letters were being pressed even though no one was in the room with me. It wasn't a word that was typed, but random letters with the @ symbols spacing them out. To me, it didn't mean anything, so I asked my friends if they thought it meant something, but they were startled by it and didn't know what it meant either. I thought it was strange, but decided to ignore it. Later that night, when I decided to go to bed, I turned off my lamp and got under the sheets. My cat, Portia, was by me sound asleep. A few moments later, I heard what sounded like footsteps slowly creepy through the hallway to my bedroom. Suddenly, they stopped right outside my doorway. I glanced up and expected to see my brother, but no one was in sight. From her dead sleep, Portia bolted up, stood at the end of my bed and stared into the hallway. I was confused since she had never done that before. I tried to get her back to her normal spot on my bed, but she wouldn't budge. I even put my hand in front of her face, but she kept trying to peer over it. She eventually sat back down and went to bed. Since then, I haven't had any other experiences like that, and I still wonder if there was something trying to contact me that night. It was a rainy winter morning. My father and I were pulling out of the driveway headed to school. We both saw a glimpse of a girl in a white dress, barefoot, blonde, maybe 5 years old, run around the corner of our home and out of sight. We both looked at each other and acknowledged that we witnessed the same thing. He got out of the car and ran around the house to look for her. When he came back, he said he couldn't find anyone, but called my mom to let her know that a little kid might be running around the yard. We thought it was weird, but not much was said of it. And there weren't any missing kids in the area. A few months later, we were remodeling our basement and found a photo album hidden behind the drywall. It was full of photos of a little girl with blonde hair in a white dress. The photo album was from 1922. The family that originally lived in the house died of TB.